research analyst Tom Wolfe to give us some insight on their latest survey, and that is as they take President William Ruto's administration's scorecard 1 year in.
All right, so you released your findings on the first year of the Kenya Kwanza administration's performance. What stood out for you? Because I know you usually have your executive summary or your conclusion, your findings. What were the highlights of this particular report?
One is the very significant increase in the proportion of Kenyans who think the country is now moving in the right direction compared to our previous survey at the end of June. I think it's up about 20%. And if I were asked what I think might account for that, because I can't prove it, I think there's several factors. It's been a number of weeks since we've had the Azimio street protests and the response of security forces that's been very controversial in terms of levels of violence. And as these reconciliation talks are beginning to get underway at Bomas, I believe, it seems that has brought a certain level of calm in the country on both sides of the political divide. There certainly has not been any decrease in the cost of living, but one other factor which seems to have been responsible for this increase is that at the end of June, you'll remember that the Finance Act was supposed to come into effect on 1st July. And as we saw in our data from that survey, there was a very widespread expectation that some of the provisions in that bill that became an act when the president signed it, and then there was, of course, a high court order blocking it for a couple of weeks, then it came into effect in July. Now I see there's a court proceeding going on today about whether it violates the Constitution or not, the way it was put together and passed. But there was a very widespread expectation that, for example, the housing level would apply to anybody who makes money, when, if I understand correctly, it's now in effect only like 3 million Kenyans who are on regular salaried employment. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the extractive impact of that on Kenyans' earnings is much narrower than what was expected at the end of June. So I think that has also helped to sort of calm a lot of people down who were worried about the impact of that.
Okay. If you were to address the Kenya Kwanza administration, what would you say they should be paying attention to as far as these findings are concerned?
Well, it's no surprise that the cost of living issue has really impacted on Kenyans. When we find that in an unprompted question, when our respondents were just asked to pick any two of the campaign promises that they remember, even if nearly 1 in 5 couldn't remember any, but maybe they were really Kenya Kwanza supporters who didn't want to mention promises if they know they haven't been fulfilled yet, we get nearly half, 47%, who said we were promised that the cost of living would be reduced. So that was definitely top of mind for more respondents than the second one, assisting small businesses, Hustler Fund, 29%. But when we asked people for each of the promises that they mentioned, the main 5, how far has the government gone in the first year to implementing these? With regard to cost of living, reducing it, only 8% said the government has gone far. And more than half, 52%, said hasn't done anything. Now, you report on economic issues also, together with your colleagues. You could look at cost of living by going to a supermarket or shop or kiosk or whatever, petrol station, and find out what has been the change in the cost of living, keeping in mind the continued depreciation in the value of the shilling, which is 10 or 15 shillings less to the dollar than it was a year ago, as well as inflation in the Kenyan economy, even without any depreciation of the value of the shilling. So even if the government had done something to lower some costs, if the shilling is getting weaker and the inflation is increasing, Kenyans wouldn't feel it. So it's not surprising that the government is getting very low marks in terms of fulfilling this promise. So I believe it to other people to advise them, but I can say on behalf of TIFA that even if we don't expect anybody in government to change policy on the basis of our findings, we think that for both the general public and the government and the political class in between that represents that public to government, whether they're in government or opposition, that these kinds of findings make it easier for them to concentrate on what Kenyans' concerns are as they move into their second year of administration.
All right. Thank you very much.
1 year since President William